What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burnett. And on today's episode, I'm going to be discussing this proposed Super League information that came out today in an article by The Athletic, talking about what college football, some people high up in college football are looking at potentially to what they say is fix college football and deal with some of the NIL issues that they're seeing, things with the transfer portal and all of that. But before I get into it, if you go on to enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date. But without further ado, let's get into this video and this topic on the Super League. For those of you who are soccer fans, we've heard the term Super League before. It was something that was suggested as kind of this competitor and a replacement for the Champions League in soccer. I'll spare the football fans the talk of that football in this episode, but what they're looking to do with this Super League. And before I get into actually also what they're looking to do, I'm going to go over some of the guys that are kind of spearheading this effort. Syracuse Chancellor Kent Syverud, hope I'm saying that right. West Virginia President Gordon Gee. NFL's number 2 executive Brian Rowlap, and then the Philadelphia 76ers owner David Blitzer, among some others as well. So these guys are all influential in college sports or sports in general, and especially football, looking at Rowlap from the NFL, kind of one of the top guys behind Roger Goodell. And so that is kind of important, I think, to preface it, that these aren't just, people who don't have any sort of power in the game. These are people who are, in really important positions. Syracuse Chancellor and West Virginia's president. I think they all, and Gordon Gee was at Ohio State for a long time, so certainly have some big impacts there. And at Syracuse as well, they are one of the biggest schools in the country for producing media talent as well. It was actually one of the schools that I looked at potentially going to because of the media program that they have there. But that's who's behind this. But what exactly is this? Well, what it is it's an idea to split college football. Also, real quick, those guys had what's called, I think, College Sports Tomorrow. CST is what it's called. It's pretty close to CFT, College Football Talk. But yeah, that's what the group is called. And so what they're looking to do is create an 80-team top division and then kind of a second division, second tier, if you're familiar with soccer terms, where there's 50-plus teams. I think there's around 130, maybe up to 136 teams in the FBS now. So it's splitting up the FBS into these two tiers. Honestly, on that basis alone, I think this is a really good move. I'll get into what those 80 teams look like. I imagine the 50 teams that are below would have divisions, but I'll get into what that looks like with the 80 teams as well. So it's kind of an 80-team top division, and that is split then into a 70-team permanent, almost like top tier. Those top 70 teams are always going to be there, and that is all teams from the major 5 Power 5 conferences. Obviously, those don't exist now, but this would basically bring them back. I might not get into what I think the division alignment would look like, but it would probably bring back some of those conferences. I hope they would do it geographically. I might even lay out kind of what I have as my idea for that, or I might save that for another video if this goes a little bit long. So you have that 70-team top tier, and that is split into 7 10-team divisions. So you're going to have 7 different divisions with 10 teams in each one. Again, I hope what they do with this is geographical. You could have East Coast, West Coast would be easy. It would be the Pac-10. And, middle of the country is where things would get a little bit interesting, seeing where teams go, trying to keep 10 in a group of teams that makes sense. But I think it's certainly an interesting proposition. I personally kind of like it. Where I think this thing might be tweaked before it actually goes into existence, though, is this idea of this second level with 10 teams. And what I'm a little bit fuzzy on with the details of this, obviously this news came out today as I'm recording on Wednesday, April 3rd. So if you're watching this in the near future, this is when this was released. So as I'm making this video, details are still, being worked out and revealed. But what it basically would be, what I gained from it, is these 10 teams would be in a promotion relegation. And I don't know if it would be, the top 5 teams in this section get to stay in this, 80-team, top league, or if all 10 would go back down. I don't imagine that's how it would be. Maybe it would be, like a top 3 and bottom 3, like what the Premier League does. The number of teams that would be promoted and relegated each year is undefined, but I imagine if they ever did implement it, it would be the top 10 teams, or maybe they'd have some sort of other formula or playoffs or something to decide it, but it'd be the top 10 teams outside of the Power 5 conferences. And again, another thing that'd be interesting is like the Power 4, but all of the teams that have been in Power 5 conferences outside of Oregon State and Washington State will still be in a now Power 4 conference, because obviously those conferences have gotten bigger. And so I imagine you'd take 10 teams from kind of those group of 5 conferences and you put them into this kind of separate division that's still part of the 80-team field, and that would determine the college football playoff, or whatever it would be called then, in this new league. And so you'd have 50-plus teams in that second division that would be competing for, who knows, 3, 5, 7 spots. I imagine, again, there'd have to be some incentive to be able to stay in that top tier. Rather than just having 10 teams rotating every single year. I don't think that would really make sense. So that's kind of the outlook for that. I think that's kind of the details with that. And so there are some things to consider. Number one, I think the implementation of this will take a while for a couple of reasons. Number one is TV deals for some of these major conferences run through 29, 30, like fiscal year, academic year. The Big Ten, that's when their media contract ends. 20, 30, and 31, that's the Big 12s, and then 33 and 34 is the SEC. I think it would be highly unlikely and extremely difficult to try to get this put in place while those TV deals are still current. Now, whether it changes maybe in the middle of those years, obviously the Big Ten being as early as 29 and 30, and the SEC being all the way in 30, 33, and 34, maybe it happens in the middle. Maybe Big 10 and Big 12 negotiate short deals, and this takes place beginning like 2034 or 2035 maybe. So that's kind of one thing that I think could hold this back a little bit. And I think also just it is a radical change. Like we've always seen realignment. I think what's been happening recently isn't a huge shock, but I think it is a shift toward this a bit. And I think it kind of opens the door, having these big conferences and having something like what the Big Ten and SEC have with their advisory, joint advisory committee or alliance, whatever you want to call it. I think that is taking a step towards this. This is kind of what I anticipated potentially happening with college football, is creating this super league. And so it is interesting, though, to see it start to formulate and see, plans put in place for this to actually happen. And another thing that's kind of being discussed with this is some of the bigger brands would get a bigger slice of the financial pie. It kind of is like in the Premier League, you have the big 6 clubs, Manchester City, Man United, Chelsea, Arsenal, Tottenham, Liverpool, I guess, would be the teams that are in that. Some teams like Everton also get a good amount of the money, but not as much as those big 6. So brands like Alabama, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan, maybe one of the Florida teams could get in there because of the brands that they have. Maybe one of the teams from the West Coast, like a USC or an Oregon, would be considered kind of one of those big clubs that would get a bigger slice of this revenue. And what they say, the guys who are heading this up, College Sports Tomorrow, are saying is that the goal is to ensure that the non-revenue sports get an equal fair share of the money, because I think the way the system works now is the money that football brings in, for the most part, not entirely, goes back to the football program. I know a lot of it does go into the athletic programs themselves, which can go to other sports. But I think the model that they have here, they even say it, is, and I'll probably pop up that quote here, is to save some of these non-revenue sports. Obviously, that's all well and good. They're going to try to make it sound like it's a good thing, like it is a fix for college sports. I think we are stepping away from the NCAA, and it's just a matter of whether we have, the Big Ten and SEC kind of lead this charge and we step away, and those are the two big, two kind of leagues, that maybe those merge into one, taking some teams from out some of the other leagues, and then maybe below them we have kind of like a second level, like how the FCS functions for the FBS right now. So that's kind of the whole thought process. Again, I could dive into what I think some of these divisions might look like. I'm kind of very early in formulating that. Again, I think something like the West Coast would be easy. Just to look at what their 10-team division would almost certainly look like. Washington, Washington State, Oregon, Oregon State, Cal, Stanford, UCLA, USC, Arizona, and Arizona State. Apart from that, there are some other ones that I think could work. A Southeast with teams like Clemson, Georgia, Florida, FSU, Miami, maybe Auburn and Alabama, and maybe a Great Lakes region that has Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan, maybe Penn State would be thrown in there. A conference that's Middle America, an old Big 8 conference, could have Nebraska. Maybe they throw in like a Wisconsin or an Iowa in there. Again, it's kind of interesting to think about what those 10-team divisions might look like. But again, this is still very early in the process. I think, if I had to say, I think this would be a little bit better than giving all the power to the Big Ten and SEC, because again, we are taking that step away from the NCAA having all the power. And if they do what they promised to do, this would give maybe a little bit more of an organized structure or more balance to the NIL situation, to transfers and everything. I know what they say in the article too as well is that they're basically trying to fix not just college football, but college sports as a whole. But if you've had a chance to dive in, or maybe after hearing this video, let me know your thoughts in the comments below on what you think about this potential Super League for college football. Let me know what you think it means for the future of college football, what it means for your team. But if you've watched to this point in the video, thank you so much for taking the time to watch College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burnett, signing out. Peace.